Hi, my name's Maris. I inherited my grandpa's house after he passed, or so I thought, because while I was grieving, my own parents sold it, behind my back. They forged my name, moved in my cousin, and called me too emotional to handle real responsibility. But Grandpa knew them better than I did. He left something in the walls they didn't see, and when they realized what they'd missed, it was already too late. Before we begin, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Drop a comment below. This story, it might just feel too familiar. I pulled up slowly, gravel crunching beneath my tires as the early evening sun hit the porch just the way it used to, Grandpa's porch. I sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to cicadas hum through the Texas spring air. For a second, it felt like he might come out any minute, wave at me like always, say, "Well, there's my girl." But he wouldn't. He was gone, and all I had left was this house. Or so I thought. When I stepped out and walked toward the mailbox, something caught my eye. The brass nameplate that used to read Blythe had been polished. No, replaced. A new engraving gleamed beneath the sunlight. Zinnia Langford. My heart stuttered. Zinnia? My cousin who used to fake allergies to skip helping Grandpa in the yard? That Zinnia? I opened the mailbox, half expecting a letter addressed to me, something from the lawyer's office confirming what Grandpa had promised. The house would be mine. Nothing. Just a coupon for dog food and a realtor flyer with Zinnia's photo smiling too wide. I carried my bag toward the front door, fishing for the spare key under the ceramic frog like always. Still there. Some things hadn't changed. Inside, the smell hit me first. Lavender, lemon oil, and something sterile, like hotel cleaning spray. I blinked hard as I stepped into the living room. Boxes. Neat, labeled, stacked 3 high along the walls. Living room decor, ZDL books, Grandpa Misk, donate. I turned slowly. The grandfather clock still ticked, but the warmth in the room was gone. A hollow version of itself. My eyes fell on one box marked, Maris Childhood Room Sort Later. The writing was sloppy, like an afterthought, as if even my memories needed to be filtered through someone else's hands. I walked down the hall, past the coat rack where Grandpa used to hang my umbrella every time I forgot it. My bedroom door was open, emptied. The closet held 2 sad boxes, both labeled the same. Miss, dispose, or donate. My heart dropped further than I thought it could. No one had called. No one had asked. I sat on the edge of the stripped bed. The indent of the mattress was gone, replaced, probably. My palms pressed into my thighs as I breathed through the ache in my throat. I knew grief would come in waves, but this was demolition. I stood slowly, steadied myself on the dresser, and made my way toward the hallway. That's when I heard the voice. "Oh, Maris, you're here early." I turned. My mother stood there, perfectly done up as always, lipstick fresh, heels clicking against hardwood like she hadn't just buried her father last week. "Early for what?" I asked quietly. She smiled like someone delivering bad news with charm. "Zinnia's been staying here to help with the transition. We're getting things ready to list." "List what?" "The house, sweetheart. You know how old it is. Upkeep alone would drown you." She walked past me and adjusted a crooked frame on the wall, like nothing in this moment was out of place. I thought... My voice trailed off. "Grandpa said... He told me this house would be mine." "Well, plans change. And you know your grandfather wasn't exactly known for handling paperwork." I didn't reply. I just walked past her and down toward the study. My shoes felt too loud, like I was stomping through someone else's home. Maybe I was. On the console table near the study door, a photo lay face down. I hesitated, picked it up. It was us, me, Grandpa, and Lucky, our old golden retriever, taken the summer after I graduated college. Grandpa's hand was on my shoulder. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes the way it always did when he said, "This house has good bones, just like you." I turned the frame over again, slowly, and set it upright. No words. No tears. Just breath. The study was darker than I remembered. The curtains had been changed, Zinnia's style probably, something trendy and beige. I moved toward Grandpa's desk. It still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. I opened drawers one by one, careful not to disturb the arrangement. Nothing unusual, until the last drawer on the right. It was locked. I stared at it for a while, tracing the edges with my fingers. Beneath the lock, just faint enough to miss unless you knew to look, were carved letters. M.A.B., my initials, no one else's. "You promised," I whispered, palm resting flat on the wood. "You said this would be mine." The light outside had shifted to a dull orange now. I didn't move. I just stood there, hand still on the drawer, trying to remember the last thing he said to me, and wondering who else had the key. I didn't even realize how long I'd been standing there until the front door creaked again. Voices filtered in, heels clicking, the rustle of paper bags, someone laughing lightly. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and stepped back into the hallway, steadying myself. The living room, just an hour ago cloaked in silence, was now buzzing. Zinnia, in some kind of designer leisure wear, was perched on the arm of the couch like it was her throne. My father, Griffin, leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, that usual weary kindness on his face, always the buffer in tense moments. And Vera, my mother, floated through the room like a hostess at a cocktail party. "We were wondering where you went," she said, smiling too wide. "I told them you were probably just reminiscing." I didn't answer. My eyes flicked to the coffee table, where a folder now sat. Thick, tidy. "Everyone's here?" Zinnia chirped, like this was a book club meeting and not my grandfather's house being gutted of memory. Griffin cleared his throat, slipping his phone into his blazer pocket. "We wanted to loop you in properly, Maris. I know this has all moved quickly, but it's really for the best." "For the best," I repeated slowly. "Exactly." Vera nodded, hands clasped like she was leading prayer. "The house went into escrow last Friday. It's a solid offer, above market. Closing should happen in about 10 days, give or take." My knees buckled just slightly, but I didn't sit. "You sold it?" "It was too much for you, sweetheart," Griffin said, like he was explaining taxes to a child. "The maintenance alone, not to mention the property taxes. You're a librarian. How would you even begin to keep up with it?" Zinnia added with a laugh. "You should be thanking us. I mean, no stress, no mortgage, no roof leaks. You dodged a bullet, cousin." I felt the air in the room shift. They weren't trying to spare me. They weren't being careless. This was planned. Vera picked up the folder, walked over, and handed it to me. "This is just acknowledgement paperwork. The buyer will come by tomorrow for a final walkthrough." I opened it with slow fingers. It was all there. Escrow details, closing date, signatures. My name wasn't one of them. "I didn't sign anything," I said. "I didn't even know there was a sale." "You didn't need to," Griffin said gently. "The property was in the family trust. That gives us executive control. Grandpa told me he left the house to me, that it would be in my name." My mother gave me a look I knew too well, somewhere between pity and exasperation. "Well, dear, verbal promises don't hold up in probate. You know that." I swallowed hard, still standing, the folder heavy in my hands. "And none of you thought to mention any of this? Before you packed up my childhood and slapped someone else's name on the mailbox?" Silence. Zinnia twirled her bracelet. "We didn't think you'd take it so personally. It's just a house." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't. It was a promise." No one answered. Griffin shifted, Vera sat, and Zinnia smirked at something on her phone. I left the room. The late afternoon sun had settled lower in the sky. I pushed open the back patio door, stepping out into the warm air. Grandpa had planted honeysuckle along the fence line, years ago. It still bloomed, wild and soft. I stood there, letting the heat soak into my skin, wondering how many decisions had been made about my life while I was still wiping my eyes at the funeral. Inside, laughter broke out. Someone said something about dinner plans. It didn't fit. None of it did. Later, after they'd all left, Zinnia with a "see you tomorrow," like we were co-workers, I collapsed into the kitchen chair and checked my phone. I shouldn't have. A post from Zinnia, a carefully curated shot of Grandpa's porch with the caption, "Some people care more about property than peace. Grandpa deserved better than drama." And the comments, "Let the dead rest. Can't believe Maris is fighting over a house. Disgusting." There's always one. My thumb hovered over the screen, numb. They were rewriting the story before it even began, painting me greedy, selfish, ungrateful. And it was working. I stood, moving without thinking, straight to the study. The screwdriver was still in the junk drawer. I pried open the lock. Wood splintered, something inside me with it. A single envelope. My name, written in Grandpa's hand. I held it, unopened. My voice cracked. What have they done? Back at my apartment, I shut the door behind me with a quiet thud and leaned against it, still gripping the envelope. I hadn't even taken my shoes off. My purse slid off my shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thump, but I didn't move. The silence was thick. No hum of conversation, no clinking of glasses. Just me. And the envelope. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down slowly, like every inch of my body was suddenly made of stone. I stared at my name on the front in Grandpa's handwriting, steady, slanted, unmistakably his. I opened it. Inside were two things, a folded copy of his original will and a yellowed sheet of notepaper. My heart picked up pace. His handwriting again. If they sold the house, check the signature, and check the date. You weren't in town. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled as I laid the will aside and dug into the folder Vera had given me earlier. I pulled out the copy of the sale agreement. There it was, my signature. Perfectly forged, right down to the slight slant in the M and the little loop at the end of the S. I hadn't signed anything. Not for the house, not for a sale, not for a single damn thing. My mind raced as I got up and pulled my laptop from the side table. I opened my inbox, hands moving on instinct now. Search. Seattle. The librarian conference. I found the flight confirmation. Departure, May 11th. Return, May 16th. I opened my digital calendar next. 4 days packed with workshops, keynote speakers, hotel bookings, and networking breakfasts. I even had a photo of me on a panel, still in my email, sent by a colleague. The sale document was dated May 13th. I hadn't even been in the state. I exhaled, slow, bitter. Then I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and grabbed an old plastic file folder. I wrote in thick black letters across the front, "Truth." I dropped in the will, the flight confirmation, and a printed copy of the forged sale page. I sat back and stared at the folder. They hadn't just taken the house. They'd erased me from the story and signed my name like I was already gone. At midnight, I picked up my phone and called Linda, one of my fellow librarians who'd organized the Seattle panel. She answered groggily. "Maris, everything okay?" "I'm so sorry to call this late," I said quickly. "Can I ask a huge favor?" There was a pause, then, "Of course." "Could you send me a letter? Just something confirming I was there the week of May 11th through 16, specifically that I spoke at the symposium on the 13th? Her voice perked up. "Yeah, definitely. I remember that day. You killed it up there." "Thanks," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "I really appreciate it." After we hung up, I plugged in my phone, walked into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and then remembered the old family iPad. Vera had synced all her devices once when I helped her recover a password. Her texts and cloud photos had backed up across devices. I hadn't thought about it since. Until now. I grabbed the tablet from the shelf in my hallway. It hadn't been used in months, but it still powered on. I tapped open the Messages app and started scrolling. And then I found it. A screenshot Griffin had sent to someone named Edward. His name matched the buyer documents. "We've got her okay. Don't worry. She won't contest. She's passive." My chest tightened. Further down, another from Vera to Griffin. "She's always been a silent one. That's why she's perfect. Perfect. Perfect to disappear. Perfect to ignore. Perfect to walk over." My jaw clenched. My fingers pressed hard into the screen as I took screenshots of both texts, emailed them to myself, and saved them to a USB drive I kept in my drawer. I labeled it the same as the folder, Truth. I held it tightly between my fingers. They didn't just lie, they counted on me to stay quiet, to be soft, to nod politely, blend into the background, and thank them for it. But they forgot something. I stood and looked around my apartment. Quiet, yes, but not weak. I picked up Grandpa's will. I slipped it into my bag. Then I grabbed my keys. You picked the wrong silent one. I didn't sleep. I sat in my car for a while after leaving the apartment, the USB still in my pocket, Grandpa's will lying on the passenger seat like a silent witness. The sun was just beginning to lighten the horizon when I pulled away from the curb and headed into downtown. By the time I parked in front of Skylar Martinez's office, the city had woken up. People walked by with coffee cups and laptops, oblivious to the world shifting beneath my feet. Her firm sat in a modest beige building with a brass plaque by the door, Martinez and Wyatt, Estate and Family Law. I walked in, the documents in hand, and told the receptionist I had no appointment, but it was urgent. A few minutes later, Skylar herself stepped into the lobby, mid-40s, composed, with a kind of calm you couldn't fake. Her dark hair was pinned up, and her charcoal suit looked like it belonged on someone who didn't lose arguments. "You're Maris?" she asked, extending a hand. "Let's talk." Her office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I sat down across from her, opened my folder labeled Truth, and slid everything across the desk. The will, the fake sale contract, the flight confirmation, the screenshots of texts. She didn't say much at first. Just read. She held the will in both hands, eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned. Then, she smiled. Slowly. "Your grandfather," she said, tapping a line with her finger, "was very careful." She turned the document toward me and pointed. "There's a clause right here that overrides the trust, says explicitly, 'The house may not be sold under any trust, delegation, or power of attorney unless Maris Blythe signs in person and in presence of 2 witnesses.'" I blinked. "Wait, so they can't sell it, not legally, and forging your signature? That's fraud. Criminal." I felt something shift inside me, like a floor clicking back into place under my feet. Skylar straightened in her chair. "We're going to file an emergency injunction to halt the transaction, and I'll be sending a letter to the buyer today." My voice came out low. "He doesn't know? If he does, he'll be answering to the state bar. If he doesn't, he'll be very interested to know he's buying stolen property." I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Do I have to go to court?" "Eventually, yes. But today, we buy time. And we shake the table." Skylar stood, went to her printer, and began preparing documents with a calm precision that made me believe, for the first time, I could win this. That evening, after leaving her office, I drove by Grandpa's house. No one was there. The porch light was off, the blinds drawn. I sat in my car for a few minutes, then stepped out, my shoes crunching against the gravel. I walked up the steps, the wood creaking beneath me, and unlocked the door with the spare key still hidden in the flower pot. Inside, it smelled like dust and old citrus cleaner, like childhood and endings. I walked to the hallway where the framed photo of Grandpa, me, and Lucky still sat. Only this time, I noticed the back was thicker than I remembered. I turned it over. 4 tiny screws held the frame backing in place. In the kitchen drawer, I found the little screwdriver Grandpa always kept near the junk tray. I returned to the frame, unscrewed the back, and there it was, taped neatly inside, a small, tarnished brass key. It was warm in my palm, like it had been waiting. I turned around, scanning the room. The fireplace stood quietly in the corner. I stepped closer. The floor near it was a patchwork of old wood, smooth from years of barefoot steps. Then I saw it. One board, near the hearth, had a small heart etched into the grain, a heart no one else would have noticed. I knelt down, the key in my hand. The floorboard gave way with a soft creak as I pried it open, breath caught in my chest, like I was disturbing a secret that had waited patiently in the dark. The heart-shaped notch hadn't been just decoration, it was direction, a sign meant for me. Inside was a fireproof lockbox no bigger than a shoebox, its corners worn smooth. I pulled it out with trembling hands and sat back against the wall, the early morning light beginning to slip through the kitchen curtains. My fingers traced the edge of the brass clasp before sliding the key in. The lock turned with a click that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, tucked neatly between layers of old flannel cloth, was a USB drive, a letter with my name written in my grandfather's bold, slanted hand, and an envelope labeled simply, Ellis. My eyes flicked back to the letter. If they try to erase you, go to Ellis. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. Grandpa had always said Ellis Granger remembered things the rest of the neighborhood forgot. Birthdays, garage codes, what year the willow tree out back finally stopped blooming. I slipped the drive and letter into my purse and held the Ellis envelope in my lap for a moment before tucking it inside too. By 9 that morning, I was on Ellis's front porch 2 blocks over, hesitating before knocking. The place looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe everything had. Paint peeled from the railing, but the wind chime made of spoons still jingled in the breeze. I used to think it sounded like old laughter. The door opened before I even knocked. "Maris Blythe," Ellis said with a crack in his voice. "I wondered when you'd come." He looked thinner, his shoulders bent inward, but his eyes were still sharp. He gestured me inside with a warmth I hadn't felt in days. "I've got something for you," he said, shuffling toward the kitchen table. "Your grandfather gave it to me last fall, said not to hand it over unless you asked." He placed a flash drive next to a cassette tape already set on the table, and beside it, an old photo I hadn't seen in years. It was the 3 of us, me, Grandpa, and Lucky, under the old willow tree in the backyard. I must have been around 7, missing a front tooth and beaming like I'd just won a trophy. On the back, in Grandpa's handwriting, "She remembers what matters." I sat down slowly, overcome. "Why'd he give you all this?" Ellis rested his palm over the cassette. "Because he didn't trust them. And he said you were the only one who'd fight for what the house meant, not just what it's worth." He opened a small cassette-to-digital converter and hit play. Grandpa's voice filled the room. "They'll tear it apart, Ellis, piece by piece. If I don't lock it down..." Ellis's voice responded, slightly muffled. "You've written the will." "It's not about paperwork, it's about intention. Maris understands that. She always did." I stared down at my hands. "She won't fight for herself," Grandpa's voice went on, "but she'll fight for the meaning. That's why she's the keeper of the flame." A knot rose in my throat. I pressed my fingers against my lips to keep from sobbing outright. My silence all these years, every time I'd let things slide, walked away instead of standing up, hadn't been weakness to him. He saw me, not loud but steady, not flashy but anchored. "Why didn't he tell me all this?" I whispered. Ellis just smiled gently. "He did. You just needed to hear it now." I stayed a little while longer. He made tea. We talked about Grandpa's laugh, his ridiculous pancakes, the summer we almost burned down the garage trying to build a treehouse. For the first time in days, my chest felt less like a cage and more like a lantern with something still burning inside. On my way out, Ellis pressed the Polaroid into my hand. "Take it," he said. "Your fight's not over, but now you've got a little more fire." Back home that evening, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The will, the flight documents, the forged sale agreement, the texts, and now, the recording. I pulled out the affidavit Skylar had given me. For a long while, I just sat there, pen in hand, staring at the paper. I thought about the photo, the tree, the way Grandpa's voice said my name like it held weight, and I signed. Not because I wanted revenge, not even just because I wanted the house, but because something sacred had been placed in my hands, and if I let them bury it under paperwork and power plays, it wouldn't just be the home that was lost, it would be everything it stood for. This wasn't just about keeping the house, it was about honoring what made it a home. After signing the affidavit, I barely slept. The night hummed with a kind of electric quiet, like a storm coiling just outside the window. By dawn, I was dressed, caffeinated, and ready, if not to win, then at least to show them I wasn't stepping aside. Skylar had arranged the meeting for 9:30 at Sterling Properties. I arrived 10 minutes early, but she was already there, standing just inside the glass doors in her usual calm authority. I'd never appreciated stillness in a person until I met Skylar. She had a way of folding intensity into grace. "Let's begin," she said, and held the door. Inside, the air was scented with artificial lavender and varnish, trying to cover the rot underneath. A junior agent blinked at me. "Do you have an appointment?" "She does now," Skylar replied, slipping a thick envelope from her bag. "Cease and desist. Please get Mr. Edward Jackson and your managing broker." The receptionist hesitated, but one look at Skylar's expression had her scurrying off like the floor might cave in. A few minutes later, Edward Jackson appeared. Late 40s, expensive haircut. Confidence cracked just slightly when he saw the legal packet in Skylar's hand. "Skylar Martinez," he said. "You're representing—" "Maris Blythe," she said. "The rightful heir to the property your firm tried to purchase with fraudulent authorization." He raised an eyebrow. "Her mother was acting as the family's point of contact. We were told—" "You were told lies," Skylar interrupted evenly. "This," she tapped the affidavit, "is a sworn statement with evidence confirming my client was not in the state at the time of the alleged signature. And this," she held up a printed copy of the sale agreement, "contains a forged signature." Edward looked at me. His tone shifted slightly, a little patronizing, a little guilty. "Your mother said you were emotional. I should have known better than to take her word as gospel." I said nothing. Sometimes silence lets the shame echo louder. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm withdrawing my offer immediately, and I'll be speaking with legal regarding damages to my firm's reputation." Skylar nodded. "I suggest you do, and you may also want to notify your title company that they nearly became part of a felony." Now, by the time we stepped back outside, word had already traveled. Zinnia's name was on the outgoing text of the front desk agent's phone. I recognized the screen. Funny how fast gossip moves when people smell liability. Skylar offered a small, satisfied smile. That was the easy part. I returned to Grandpa's house that afternoon. The driveway was full, again. Vera's car parked diagonally like she owned the sidewalk. Zinnia's Range Rover, its back hatch open. Cardboard boxes were stacked in the living room. Again. Inside, I found them cataloging, as Vera called it. She wore gloves, pearlescent white, and held one of Grandpa's wooden pipe cases like she was reviewing antiques for auction. "We're just documenting what needs to be relocated," she said, not even glancing up. "You mean stolen?" I snapped. Zinnia gave a small, breathy laugh. "That's rich coming from you. Suddenly you care about these dusty old things?" I stepped closer. "They're not things. They're stories, and you're not touching another one." "Maris," Vera sighed, lowering the pipe box, "you've made your point, but your grandfather belonged to all of us, and you're making this divisive." I narrowed my eyes. "No, Mom. You did that when you signed my name on a legal document and called it convenient." Her jaw tensed, but I was already turning. That's when I saw it. One of Grandpa's paintings, leaning against the wall near the door. A landscape of the Colorado mountains we'd once hiked together when I was 15. But something was wrong. The colors were off. Too vibrant. Too fresh. I knelt beside it. Zinnia scoffed. "Please don't start playing curator." I ran my finger along the edge of the canvas. It didn't feel right. Not stretched linen. A synthetic blend. I called Skylar. "I need a favor. Bring someone who knows art." Within the hour, she arrived with a local appraiser, Ms. Levin, a retired museum registrar. She examined the piece without comment for several minutes before speaking. "This is a reproduction," she said. "A good one, but not the original." Vera's tone was sharp. "That's impossible. That painting's been in the family for years." Skylar raised an eyebrow. And yet here we are. I felt something knot inside me. This wasn't about the house anymore. It never had been. They weren't just selling the property. They were laundering what was inside it, replacing originals, gutting memories, converting Grandpa's life into liquidable assets, and calling it closure. I moved through the hall and stopped beneath the attic hatch. I hadn't been up there since high school, but something told me, if they'd hidden one thing, they'd hidden more. I reached up, pulled the rope ladder down, heart pounding, dust swirling. The ladder creaked as I climbed, the air growing mustier with each rung. Light from the hallway barely reached into the attic, but I didn't need much to see the shape pressed behind the chimney wall, something metallic, square, and waiting. I crawled over the beams until I reached it, a small, brushed steel safe tucked behind a loose wooden panel. No keyhole, just a keypad. I stared at it for a long moment, dust clinging to my palms. Birthdays? I tried Grandpa's. Invalid. Mine? Also wrong. Then it came to me, one afternoon years ago, helping him set up an email account. "Let's keep it simple," he'd said, chuckling. "How about Lucky's adoption date?" I typed it in. 0417. Click. The latch gave. The lid opened slowly with a soft groan. Inside was a bundle of aged documents and a flash drive wrapped in wax paper. I lifted out a stack of ownership certificates, each stamped with verified appraisals. These weren't just dusty heirlooms, they were historically significant, pieces I'd seen on Grandpa's study walls my whole life, now backed by authentication. Letters from his insurance provider confirmed the valuations. My stomach turned. They'd been planning to swap them for worthless copies and pocket the cash. Tucked at the bottom, a handwritten note in Grandpa's familiar looping scrawl. "If they get desperate, they'll trade history for cash. Don't let them." These pieces were collected with meaning, not money. You're the only one who saw that. I sat there in the attic for several minutes, knees tucked in, holding that note like a lifeline. Downstairs, my phone buzzed. It was Skylar. "She filed a counterclaim," she said calmly. "Your mother is alleging mental instability, falsified documentation, and undue influence." I closed my eyes. The playbook of the guilty: turn the story around, make the victim look unbalanced. "She's requesting a freeze on all proceedings," Skylar continued, "but don't panic. We expected retaliation." I exhaled slowly. "Let her throw the book. I've got the truth." After putting everything back in the safe, I carefully sealed it again. My next step would require the original documents, but those would go through Skylar now, properly secured. That afternoon, as the sun cast long lines across the backyard, I went to sit by the willow. The tree still leaned slightly to one side, like it was listening. Zinnia found me there, barefoot in her designer jumpsuit, like she thought this was some kind of lifestyle shoot. "You never fought for any of this," she said, arms crossed. "Why now?" I didn't look at her. "Because Grandpa fought for me. Even when I didn't think I deserved it." She snorted. "You're not special. You just happened to be first in line this time." I finally turned toward her. "I'm the only one who read the fine print." Zinnia's mouth twitched. She turned to go but hesitated. "You think this ends with the house?" "It doesn't." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm still here." Evening came. I was standing in the dining room, sorting through the legal folders again, when I heard the engine. I moved to the front window. A moving van sat at the curb, engine idling. Behind it, Vera stepped out of a black SUV. She wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits walked beside her, each holding briefcases. They weren't here to talk. I felt my breath catch as I backed away from the window, my voice low, steady, but bracing. "They're making their final move." I backed away from the window slowly, the men in dark suits still making their way up the path. For a moment I thought about running upstairs, slamming the door, locking myself away like I used to when I was 12 and didn't know how to fight back. But I wasn't 12 anymore. And this wasn't about hiding. Instead, I walked calmly to the dining room, picked up my phone from the edge of the table and tapped the record button. I set it face down, microphone angled toward the room. The front door flung open without so much as a knock. Vera entered first, heels sharp against the hardwood, flanked by two estate attorneys who looked like they'd just stepped out of a courtroom drama. She didn't even glance at me as she made a beeline for the dining table. "This house was never just about you," she said coldly, tossing a folder down like a gauntlet. I didn't flinch. I reached into the side drawer and pulled out my own folder. I opened it slowly, laying out each appraisal, each certificate, each authenticated document I'd found in the safe. "No," I said. "It was about the $2 million you were laundering through Grandpa's art." One of the lawyers shifted in his seat. The other stopped mid-page. Before Vera could muster a retort, the door opened again, this time by invitation. Edward Jackson stepped in, looking far less smug than when I last saw him. Skylar followed closely behind, a quiet force of calm, her briefcase in hand. She nodded at me once and took a seat. Edward's eyes scanned the room. "I wasn't told this would be a group session." Skylar gave a small smile. "We thought it best you heard all sides." I walked to the entertainment console, pulled the USB from my pocket, and inserted it into the old laptop on the sideboard. The screen flickered for a moment, then Grandpa's face appeared, tired, older than I remembered, but eyes still as clear as ever. "If you're watching this," his voice rasped from the speakers, "they did exactly what I feared, but I left the truth in the walls, and I left it for Maris because she's the only one who listened." The room was silent. Even the attorneys didn't shuffle. Edward sat back. "Your mother said you were unstable, that you hated this place." I turned to him, my voice level. "She said that because I never told her what she wanted to hear. I didn't want to sell it. I didn't want to pretend Grandpa meant nothing. That's the difference between us." Vera stood abruptly. "Oh, please. Are we really giving weight to a sentimental recording? He was old. He said things like that all the time." Skylar raised a brow and opened her folder. "We also have video evidence of the forged signatures, insurance reports, and emails coordinating the art swap." But Vera wasn't done. She smirked and tapped on her iPad. "Then how about a video of Maris herself saying she wanted to walk away from this house?" She turned the screen to Edward, playing a clip from a barbecue years ago. There I was on screen, in a blue summer dress, holding a lemonade, laughing and saying, "I wish I could just walk away from this house." Vera paused the clip. "Case closed." Skylar didn't even blink. "Play it in full." Edward handed her the tablet. Skylar scrolled and played the rest. I appeared again on screen, sighing, my tone shifting. "But I promised him I wouldn't, not after everything he built here." Silence. I stepped forward. They thought I'd stay silent, but silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. I handed Edward the entire case file. Timelines, appraisal records, Grandpa's final video, emails, everything you weren't told. He turned to Vera, eyes sharper now. "I won't be part of this anymore. You've crossed every line." Vera's face contorted. "We gave you life," she hissed. I stared at her, voice calm. "And you tried to sell it back to me." Blue and red lights flared through the front windows. The room fell still. Skylar stood gathering her bag. She looked at the door, then back at Vera. "They're not here for me," she said softly. Skylar's words echoed in my ears as the officers stepped forward, their clipped commands rising over Vera's frantic denials. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That moment belonged to truth, and I'd said enough. 3 weeks have passed since then, long enough for the shock to settle, not long enough for the ache to fade. The house is quiet now, quiet in the way you only understand after chaos has been cleared out. The front door creaked the same way it always had. The air smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, and for once, I could walk from room to room without bracing for a confrontation. Vera and Griffin were both charged. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The legal language sounded cold and sterile, but the impact was very real. Zinnia avoided trial by taking a deal. She left town without even packing the last of her things. I didn't stop her. Edward testified on my behalf. To his credit, He didn't try to justify his role in the manipulation. He simply said, "I believed the wrong people," and walked away from the sale. I could respect that. The house, legally, is mine now, but I never wanted to just keep it. I walked the length of the hallway that morning, pausing at each room, not to mourn, not to celebrate, but to plan. The boxes lining the walls weren't for leaving, they were for reimagining. One room would be a reading circle for seniors who needed company, another an art room for kids whose families couldn't afford summer programs. In the backyard, I would restore Grandpa's shed into a workshop for community classes. Not a museum, not a shrine. A space to keep the flame alive, like he'd hoped. Ellis came by again today. He shuffled a little slower than last time, but his eyes lit up as soon as he saw the photo in the hallway, the one I'd hung beneath the stained glass window Grandpa loved. It was the Polaroid. Grandpa, me, and Lucky under the old willow, all of us beaming like fools. Ellis placed a small plaque below the frame. "She remembers what matters." I didn't trust my voice to thank him. I just nodded, and he squeezed my hand like he knew. Later that afternoon, I returned to Grandpa's study, the one room I hadn't touched yet. It was still mostly as he'd left it, books stacked in odd towers, a pipe resting on the windowsill. The smell of ink and pine still clung to the air. I opened the last drawer I hadn't checked. Tucked inside, wrapped in a faded cloth napkin, was a leather-bound notebook. The final entry was dated just 3 days before he passed. "Redemption is heavier than revenge, and more lasting. You remembered, Maris. You kept the house alive." I closed the book and held it to my chest. Outside, golden light filtered through the branches. The house groaned quietly in its bones, the same sounds I'd grown up hearing when the nights got cold or the rain came hard. I sank into the old sofa by the window, the one he used to nap on with Lucky curled at his feet. My body finally let go of the tension I'd carried for months, maybe years. They tried to erase me from the story, but the house remembered. And now, so will everyone else.